It's Monday here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, joined by Ray Fittipaldo, one of our great Steelers beat writers. We're going to delve more into what happened in the Steelers' last preseason game and what needs to be done for the final week of the preseason for the Steelers to be ready for week one of the regular season. All that here and more on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, joined here by Ray Fittipaldo, breaking down all Steelers show today, talking about the Steelers coming out of their second preseason game where they lost 9-3 to the Buffalo Bills. We gave you our post-game thoughts. Now we give you our full analysis after having a couple days to break things down. As always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of our daily content from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, including the Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast. All right, Ray, let's break a few things down here. I want to lead on the quarterback situation because that was supposed to be the thing that was definitely improved with Russell Wilson, with Justin Fields. And I will say that there are, in my opinion, I think there are some things that do look promising at times where a quarterback is able to make some reads and process and get the ball out on time. But the bottom line is I think we've probably seen about 8 to 10 drives of the first team offense, whether it was Fields or Wilson running the first team offense, and not a single point from it. And whereas last year, the first team offense with Kenny Pickett had 5 drives and 5 touchdowns, and everyone thought it was going to be great. And it turned out it was quite the opposite of that. Is this a cause for alarm for you that this is happening? And what do you think is the thing, or is this a cause for alarm for you? And if it is, what should the Steelers be doing from this point forward to get ready for week one?
Yeah, I mean, there's only one preseason game left, Chris, and after that, they're going to have to play the Atlanta Falcons. So there does have to be some urgency there. Let's take Russell Wilson first. His debut after dealing with the calf injury. It was hard for me to judge how he did. He was under duress almost the entire time he was in there. We're going to speak at length about Broderick Jones and his issues in the next couple of segments. But Russell Wilson really didn't have a chance on a lot of those dropbacks. And the first drive, he had a 3rd and 5, and Calvin Austin the third goes offside. So then it's 3rd and 10. And you're behind the sticks, and it's hard, to call a game when you're constantly in 3rd and longs. And they were in those situations way too much because of penalties and because of sacks. So, that's Wilson. I want to see more from him. With Fields, what I've seen in the first 2 games, he's able to move the ball.
Yeah.
He was okay passing. He's really good running the ball, whether it's designed runs or whether it's him escaping pressure. But his work in the red zone isn't good enough. And I think that's something they have to hone in on this week. We saw last week Mike Tomlin and Arthur Smith wanted to clean up, the QC exchange and, some of the other issues, possession downs, and they worked on 3rd downs a lot last week. I think this week red zone has to be a big point of emphasis. If you can't score in this league, you're not going to be able to win. And I think they have to get that rectified soon and do it this week against the Lions.
I agree. You want to not just move the ball, you want to finish drives. And Mike Tomlin's talked about possession downs a lot. And I believe through the first two games, they haven't been above like 30% on 3rd downs. And that's not acceptable if you're the Steelers. They were 31% against the Bills. But still, that's terrible. That's not what you want. And again, it comes back to me is like, look, I've understood, and Justin Fields has had some promising moments, like the play where he skipped out of 2 guys sacking him and kept the play alive and found Des Fitzpatrick on the sideline. Plays like that are like, wow, that's really physically impressive. But at some point, you need to see this first team offense show something, and even in the Ben Roethlisberger years, there were years where they didn't score a whole lot, but you knew, hey, this offense knows what it's supposed to do. Ben Roethlisberger is the guy; he's going to figure it out. But you don't know that about this group. You don't know this about Russell Wilson. You don't know about Justin Fields, and with an offense that, if you count all the people that are on rookie contracts, that's not just Broderick Jones, Troy Fautanu, and Zach Frazier. That's also guys like Najee Harris. That's also guys like Pat Freiermuth. That's also guys like George Pickens. There's the majority of this offense are on their rookie deals. It's going to take time for those guys to gel. And if you want a guy who's going to be the leader, the reason that you went and signed Russell Wilson in the first place was to be the leader. I think he needs to develop chemistry with them. And that's not just and I'm not saying, beat him up and wear him down, because he is a 35, going to be 36 soon year old quarterback that needs to be fresh. But you spent all this training camp time with Justin Fields running the first team. Get Russell Wilson out there, and like in this third preseason game, I think he had 5 series in this last one. I think he needs 5 series, unless they score like 1 or 2, 2 drives in a row or something like that in this next one. I think they need the reps to show, hey, this is what the offense will look like in the regular season.
Yeah, and if you go back to the third preseason game last year, all the starters played, so it's different. This final preseason game, it's not what it used to be when you were playing a week later. Now there's 2 weeks of a gap before the opener. So I think Mike Tomlin feels like, okay, we can run our starters out there, we'll get them some work, and then we have some time to rest, get some injuries squared away, and then we'll start preparing, for the Falcons after that. So, I'm with you. I think the one area where you can maybe help this offense, I think this was their plan all along. Got to be able to run the football, Chris. If you're constantly, even 3rd and 5, before the Austin penalty, you got to get more manageable 3rd downs. And they haven't really run the ball all that well this preseason. Now that's going to be complicated by Jaylen Warren's injury, who's certainly not going to play this week. And, I know the Steelers are keeping their fingers crossed that the hamstring injury won't keep him out of the regular season opener. But, this was a team that was supposed to be, built around the running game with Arthur Smith, Jaylen Warren, and Najee Harris. And, through 2 weeks against the Bills and the Texans, we haven't really seen evidence of that.
Yeah, I think that's certainly a big problem of that. And that's kind of what I think, maybe just as much, if not a bigger problem than the quarterback position, is the offensive line. This offense is being designed around this offensive line that's been invested into. And look, yes, there's a lot of rookies, young players figuring things out, and there's injuries. But I want to talk about all of that next here on the North Shore Drive podcast, because Ray and I are going to break down a lot of problems with this offensive line. Stay tuned as we get into more about that. Broderick Jones, Troy Fautanu, Zach Frazier, and all the things happening with the offensive line that have to get better. We'll talk about that next here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo, talking all things Steelers. And we're going to focus on the offensive line for a bit here. We like you were saying at the end of the last segment, this Steelers offensive line has to be better, especially, pass protection, no doubt. Mike Tomlin addressed that after the game. Allowing 3 sacks on Russell Wilson was inexcusable. But also in the run game, this offensive line has not shown the punch that it's supposed to show in either of these preseason games. Now, it's funny, but I thought they showed it in the Thursday practice when the first play of practice was when it was 11-on-11, full speed, everyone in full pads and everything, and Najee Harris breaks off a 40-yard touchdown run. The next one's a Jaylen Warren 15-yard run, and you're seeing holes get opened up. And part of it, inconsistency happens with younger players. That's absolutely the acknowledgement. Offensive linemen and linemen in general in football, sometimes they don't get to be their best until they're, they fill into their bodies when they're 25, 26, 27, even 28 years old sometimes. Ask Cam Hayward, go look at his numbers. But at the same time, I do feel like this offensive line hasn't shown the nastiness that you and I have seen in training camp in either of these preseason games yet. And I think that is a cause for concern when you're trying to see this offense and what it's supposed to look like under Arthur Smith.
Yeah, Chris, people don't want to hear it, but it takes time to develop an offensive line. We asked Andy Weidel about that on Thursday before the joint practice, and he's really excited. He also acknowledged that when you have young guys, it takes time to build that chemistry. So undoubtedly, Zach Frazier, Troy Fautanu, Broderick Jones, they are the foundation of this line for the future. And now because of injuries, it's happening sooner rather than later. And they need those guys to grow up really quick, but it's not going to happen overnight. I mean, to expect Zach Frazier to come in here and play like Marquise Pouncey in 2014, when Pouncey was a 4-year vet and they were running the ball down people's throats. I'm sorry, that's not going to happen. Expecting Troy Fautanu to come in and to play like an all-pro as a rookie, I'm sorry, it's not going to happen. These guys are going to need time to get acclimated to the NFL. I suppose the good thing is, the schedule's a little bit easier in the first half of the season, so it's going to be baptism by fire for both of those guys. And I'm assuming Fautanu is going to be fine after this week. He should be back in there before the Falcons game. But it's an exciting time for the Steelers and their coaching staff, but it's also a time of you have to acknowledge, Chris, that these things take time and it's not always going to be pretty. And I don't think it's going to be pretty early on in the season. There's going to be some growing pains with this unit.
No, there certainly is, and I think we're seeing some general pains in general right now with this unit because they're dealing with a lot of injuries. We already know Troy Fautanu has missed at least 1 week now. He's probably going to miss at least this week too, recovering from his injury. I think it's his right knee that's sprained, or at least his right leg. We now also know that Nick Herbig is going to miss extensive time with a torn rotator cuff, as we reported with Jerry Dulac at the Post-Gazette. And that's, Nate Herbig, is, everyone was kind of looking for Frazier to start over him. He was your depth at center. And now you have to kind of adapt someone to be at that position. Maybe Spencer Anderson, maybe, someone else. But I think that's another position that you now have to take a closer look at. Who's the top backup there? Because it was Zach Frazier, and now he's definitely your starter. But then also, even that is Broderick Jones, who has who's been dealing with a right elbow injury since the first real day of training camp, where he injured it, and we saw him put on a brace throughout training camp, and he hasn't even looked good. And he was one of the guys I thought could be a leading force for the offensive line this year with the way that he played at the tail end of last season. So it seems to me like injuries are a part of the problem, but they still need to see some of these guys show progress and take steps forward. Ray, what are you seeing from this offensive line that can at least be addressed in the immediate sense here?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most pressing concern is the play of Broderick Jones, and we saw with Fautanu giving up 2 sacks against the Texans. The Steelers weren't really worried, and they're still not worried about his development. They feel like he's going to be a really, really good piece of their line, and it's going to happen early as soon as he comes back for the injury. With Broderick Jones, Chris, when they made that decision to put Fautanu at right tackle and to keep him there, they were going to let it play out with Broderick Jones and Dan Moore at left tackle. It's not like they said, okay, Broderick, you're the left tackle, Dan Moore, you're the swing tackle. They were going to let that play out in a competition. So whether they don't feel like he's ready yet, whether there's some technique issues that have to be ironed out, whatever it is, it's not a good sign, for the Steelers offensive line. I think they were expecting at this point that he would be a little bit further along. Now they have kind of, messed with him a little bit, being right when he's a natural left tackle. I get it, but Chris, he played really well at right tackle at the tail end of last season. He was a good player. So if he did it once at right tackle, there's no reason why he can't do it again, even when he's just doing it on a short-term basis until Troy Fautanu comes back.
Yeah, I look at the way the things played out, and I did a film study on Broderick Jones and what we saw in the second preseason game. and what the biggest problem is. And the conclusion that I'm coming to, Ray, is like his punching power isn't there right now, and maybe it's because of his right arm injury. Maybe his right elbow is making him not feel comfortable being aggressive with his hands, because his footwork looked fine. He looked like he was getting to the right spots in his dropbacks, especially in pass protection, but he wasn't able to properly engage Greg Rousseau on the pass rush. And and then even the run game, like his feet would get to where he was supposed to be. He would, if he needed to climb to a linebacker, he could get to a linebacker, no problem. But you didn't see him like just punch a guy in the chest, control them, and drive them and beat them up the way that we saw him do last year. And to me, that's a point of concern for the Steelers right now. Now, again, maybe it's because his elbow's injured and he doesn't feel comfortable punching there. But this goes back to like what you're saying. His natural position is left tackle, and I don't get. And I'm gonna, I know that Dan Moore Jr.'s got 3 years of starting experience, but I do not get the reason. Everyone knows he's not the franchise guy at that position. Everyone knows that Broderick Jones was drafted to be that, and Troy Fautanu was drafted to be the other one. So why play this game where Broderick Jones isn't a rookie anymore? When he came in, the Steelers went from when he didn't play, they were one of the worst rushing offenses in the NFL. When he did play, they were the number 2 rushing offense in the NFL, and it makes no sense to me to not flip him to the position that you want him to ultimately be at, and where because of his right arm being injured, if he's the left tackle, his left arm can be his attack hand again in pass protection. It's just so many things line up, and I do not understand why they are continuing this game where Dan Moore just has to play left tackle, and he's too good to not play left tackle because he can't play right tackle. None of that adds up to me.
Yeah, for Broderick's sake, Chris, I hope the injury is part of this equation, because if it's not, then there's some deeper concerns there. I know you were there with me Saturday night. We were waiting to talk to Broderick, and he said he couldn't talk because he had to go speak with the team doctor. Now, we should point out, as you said, this injury happened in the first padded practice, I think July 28th or 29th, something like that. But he hasn't missed practice, Chris. He's been out there every day. He has been held out of some drills. I noticed early on he wasn't doing a lot of the one-on-one pass pro stuff. So maybe, the punching is a concern. They kind of want to rest that elbow. But Chris, you would think if it's anything serious, or if it was anything serious, they would have had him down for a week or two and say, hey, just let it heal up. So the fact that he wasn't tells me that it was just something that he has to play through. But hey, maybe something happened in that game. Maybe he aggravated it. Maybe it's worse now. So to me, that's what we have to find out this week. What's going on with that elbow? Is it a long-term problem? And if it's not, they got to get him situated, because what we saw Saturday night against the Bills obviously was not good enough.
I agree. I look at, and that's the other thing. Like you said, we tried to talk to him. He didn't want to. He said he had a meeting with his doctor. He wasn't able to talk. But I think at some point, we're going to be able to talk to him this week, and I'll be interested to see, how does he feel with his elbow right now? How does he feel with his playing there? Because like you said, even in the practice that he got injured, we saw him come out of 7 shots, and this was way back on July 28th. I think it was the first day where they did 7 shots, and he pulls himself out of practice because he injures himself, but then he goes back in that practice, and since then he hasn't, like you said, he hasn't missed. And they've held him out of some drills, but he's been there. And again, I think in practice he's even looked fine. Like we saw again. I saw him on Thursday, 2 days before this game, go up against Gregory Rousseau, go up against Von Miller, go up against everyone the Bills were throwing at him, and I thought he looked as strong as he had. I was like, okay, he's ready for this game, and then he just wasn't. And so it makes me wonder, was there, like you said, was there something else? Did he get tweaked? Is there something else going on there? There's so many concerns there, and again. Troy Fautanu, rookie, supposed to develop, and he's injured right now. Zach Frazier, rookie, he's going to take time to develop. Broderick Jones is supposed to be the guy that'd be like, hey, this is the sign of the progress this Steelers offensive line is making. Here we show you that progress, and there hasn't been any.
Yeah, one thing that we saw against Rousseau, really on both of the sacks that Broderick gave up, he was retreating into a classic pass pro stance, what the Steelers really had done under Mike Munchak. Pat Meyer, with a lot of these guys, is teaching jump sets, to change it up a little bit. And you would think, if you don't have your punching power, if you're not able to land your punch the way you want to, a jump set would be maybe preferable because you get your hands on the guy earlier, and it's more of a wrestling match at the line of scrimmage if you're able to get your hands on him. So, again, it was only one game, Chris. I don't want to make too much of it, but it looked really bad on Saturday night, and hopefully the injury is not bad. And number two, if it's not, hopefully they can get Broderick back on the right track this week before the Lions game.
Agreed. I want to talk more about this offense and where Arthur Smith fits into all of this next here on the North Shore Drive podcast for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo, stick with us. But first, I want to talk to you all about our great sponsors at Savinas, Kane, and Gallucci. They're your mesothelioma and asbestos lawyers with over 85 years of experience. Call them today for a free consultation. That's Savinas, Kane, and Gallucci. We're also brought to you by Moon Township Honda, where you can get your new Honda right in Moon Township at 5802 University Boulevard, Moon Township, Pennsylvania, or go to their website, moonhonda.com. Here's a message from our friends at Moon Township Honda.
To build the Honda CR-V Hybrid, we took everything you love about the CR-V and kicked it up a notch with greater power for a CR-V unlike any before. Adventure confidently with Honda, Car and Driver's most awarded brand in 10 Best history. The CR-V and CR-V Hybrid, part of the Honda line of rugged vehicles. Visit your local Honda dealer where new vehicles are arriving daily. Buy online or reserve from select Honda dealers.
We're back here in the North Shore Drive podcast for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, I want to talk to you about more of this offense here. And part of it is some of the criticism we're seeing nationally about the Steelers offense. Nothing looks different. Everything looks the same. It still looks like the same haphazard offense. And I don't feel like it's the same haphazard offense as far as the structure of the plays. I do think that there's more to things there. There's a lot more chase there, but I also feel that people just looking at it is like, look, man, don't got time to break everyththing down. I just want to see points, and you haven't seen points yet, and there's some concerns there. There's always the notion that in preseason you're just experimenting. You're not really putting what you're actually going to do in week one game day out there. But do you feel like there should be a sense of urgency this week with Arthur Smith to be like, hey, all right, we've experimented enough. Let's show that if we go out and we go out here like we are going to go out in game day, that we can punch people in the mouth and play the kind of football that we've been talking about all summer.
Yeah, Chris, there's a fine line between showing too much in the preseason and then, sometimes you just have to do what you got to do to make the offense look presentable. And I think one adjustment you'll see this week, if they feel like Broderick Jones or Dan Moore needs a little bit of help, they'll keep a tight end in, or they'll keep a running back in to chip there. So there are little simple adjustments that you could do to give your quarterback, the time that he needs to, make a play. Because we honestly, we didn't get a chance to see Russell Wilson do that against the Bills. But on the other hand, Chris, I don't want Arthur Smith to show his hand to the Falcons or to anyone else. I would rather it be vanilla, but you do want to see the basic fundamental stuff done better. There's no reason why you can't be vanilla and run the ball better than they have. There's no reason you can't be vanilla and still execute some simple concepts in the passing game if the pass protection is there. So, I just want to see Russell Wilson operate with a clean pocket this week. I want to see the running game do better. Those are the things that I want to see accomplished against the Lions. And then after that's over, then let's get on to the regular season, and we'll probably see a better version of Arthur Smith's offense. But we're not there yet.
No, I agree. Because part of what you're getting at it too is that, like we said with Russell Wilson, it's tough to evaluate Russell Wilson and whether or not he's going to process the field well for the Steelers and do the things he needs to do at quarterback when he's under pressure within 3 seconds. and Russell Wilson's a guy that he can buy time, but he's not the young Russell Wilson where he can buy time in ridiculous ways that he used to when, he was just dodging like 3 guys, keeping a play alive, and then launching a moon ball 40, 50 yards. He could still launch that moon ball, but he's not as mobile as he used to be. But even so, you invested in this offensive line to make it so that he shouldn't have to deal with all of that. And when those things aren't happening, and again, it's not like the things that are happening are extra complex that defense is doing. The offensive line is just getting beat. And Broderick Jones giving up pressure to Greg Rousseau. James Daniels, I think, has had a very bad first 2 preseason games, and there's no excuses for him. He's not injured, and this is not his first rodeo or his second or third rodeo. He's supposed to be one of the veterans that keeps things together. I think this offensive line needs to show, and I think Pat Meyer, you were talking about him earlier what he's teaching. I think whatever he's teaching needs to show very soon that these guys are grasping it and can put it on a playing field. And I'm not rushing to conclusions and saying that, he's the big problem here and he should be fired, because the offensive line took steps forward last year. They did improve last year, and that was under his tutelage. And I think that's why they kept him around with the offensive staff for this season. But, I think that they need to show that. And that's why I'm not ready to really go after Arthur Smith and his schematics and his concepts and passing concept and his timing of calling plays. But I am looking at, can this team execute the fundamentals in these games? Because if they do those things, then I think we start to see some of the structures of these plays play out and get to evaluate that. But I don't think we've even got a chance to really see that with Russell Wilson at quarterback.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. The Steelers need Isaac Seumalo and James Daniels to be their 2 best offensive linemen. It's crazy to think that they should be relying on rookies or second-year players to lead that unit. So I agree with you. James Daniels, when he first got here, was coming from the Chicago Bears. I remember he had like 3 offensive line coaches in the 4 years that he was there. He came here, Pat changed his technique up. Okay, rough first season, but then, he's a little bit better last year. He really doesn't have an excuse now to be playing poorly. He's in his 3rd year in this system, and he's got to be better. So, so it's a little bit of a concern for me. Your veteran should be leading this unit. I think Seumalo is going to be fine, but when you have a young offensive line, you need all those vets to step in and lead that unit. And, that's certainly something we'll be looking for once the games start to count for real, because we haven't seen that in the first 2 preseason games just yet.
Absolutely. I want to talk more about that throughout the week. We'll see how things play out. We'll get to talk to the Steelers Tuesday in their locker room as they are now back at the South Side. Training camp is officially over, but the preseason is not. And we have about 3 more weeks before the Steelers get their week 1 matchup. We'll talk about that more here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Thanks so much for tuning in. Ray, thank you for joining us. Thank you all for joining us here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Follow Ray Fittipaldo at RayFit1 on Twitter as well. And read all of our work at post-gazette.com right here on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We're back Wednesday with more here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.